They always say betrayal cuts deeper when it comes from the people you've spent your whole life protecting. I used to think that was just something folks said to make pain sound poetic. But the truth is, when the knife comes from your own child, it doesn't feel poetic. It feels surgical, cold, precise, and permanent. That Tuesday morning, just 2 days before Thanksgiving, I was standing on the back porch of my little yellow house in Marathon, Florida. The sea was quiet. My coffee was hot. I was folding an old linen tablecloth I hadn't used in years. I remember the way the corners of it had frayed, softer than the memories stitched into it. For a moment it felt peaceful, still, like maybe the years had finally settled into something soft. Then the phone rang, and that peace cracked right down the middle. It was my son, Grant. His voice was too cheerful for someone who hadn't visited me in months. "Hey, Mum." So Lydia had this idea, and honestly, we're all super excited. You're gonna love it. In the background, I heard her. Lydia, his wife of 7 years, the one who could smile through gritted teeth and make it look like grace. Her voice cut through the speaker like ice water. "Tell her, Grant. Go on. Tell her." He hesitated, which meant he knew better. "So, Lydia's family is coming down for Thanksgiving. About 35 of them, from all over. Her aunts, cousins, her uncle Raphael, the whole crew. So we were thinking, since you've got the space and you're so good at cooking." He trailed off like he was offering me a vacation package. She snapped, cutting him off. "We'll need 2 turkeys, all the sides, desserts, the works. And the table needs to look nice. It's not just dinner, it's an impression. You know how family is." My hand gripped the edge of the porch rail. I hadn't even agreed yet, and they were listing demands. Lydia's voice sharpened. "And obviously you'll be staying behind the scenes. Like always. No stress. We know you've got it handled. Just the food, the setup, and, you know, keep out of the way once guests arrive. Let it feel like our event." Then she laughed. Grant laughed too. I didn't. I stared out at the sea and realized something quietly devastating. They didn't see me as family. I was staff. No. Worse, I was invisible. There was a pause. Grant must have sensed the silence stretching too long. "You still there, Mum?" I was. Barely. That's when Lydia added the final twist of the knife. Her voice went soft, almost syrupy. "We're just so grateful we can count on you. It's what you're good at. You make things feel taken care of. You give everything that cozy touch. You've always been that kind of woman. Like a warm wallflower. A warm wallflower. My husband used to call me fire under porcelain. Lydia preferred wallpaper." Before I could answer, I heard a sharp little snap. The sound of Lydia taping a printed schedule to what I later learned was her kitchen wall. A full breakdown, prep times, serving flow, clean-up logistics. The title across the top read, "Thanksgiving Master Plan, hosted by Lydia and Grant." But the last line made my stomach twist. "Kitchen staff, Marjorie K." My name, typed, listed. I wasn't invited. I was assigned. That was the moment, not loud, not dramatic, just clear. The air shifted, the sea stopped moving, the coffee in my hand went cold. And something inside me, something that had been patient and generous and so very tired, stood up. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't explain. I just said one word. "All right," and hung up. If you're listening to this and thinking, maybe they were just clueless, maybe it was an innocent mistake, then bless your heart. But you haven't seen what I've seen. You haven't cooked for people who don't say thank you. You haven't cleaned up after parties where you weren't invited to sit. You haven't been erased so gently you almost missed it. But I didn't miss it this time. This time, I saw everything, and I was about to teach my son and his perfectly polished wife what it really meant to be taken for granted. They wanted a Thanksgiving to remember. Good. So did I. And believe me, they were going to get it. The house was too quiet. That kind of quiet that doesn't soothe, just hangs thick in the air like a warning. I stood in the hallway, holding my breath and staring at the shelf by the stairs. It used to hold everything that mattered. Framed photos, a few cards Grant had made in elementary school, and in the center, a velvet-lined box with my late husband's service watch. That box was gone. Not moved. Gone. I didn't rush. I walked over slow, heart already bracing for what I knew to be true. The ring of dust where it used to sit hadn't even been disturbed. That box had been removed carefully, deliberately. The kind of removal someone makes when they're hiding something. I opened the drawer below, checked the closet, checked the laundry cabinet where I sometimes stored Christmas decor. Nothing. The watch was gone. It was the only thing I had left of my husband's service years. He earned it with decades in the Navy, and I kept it like people keep ashes. I never wore it. I never even opened the box unless I needed to remember who we had been. It was his, but in the years since his funeral, it became the last piece of dignity I could hold on to. And it was gone. I stood there in the hallway, staring at the empty space until my phone buzzed in the other room. A single vibration. I walked to the kitchen, checked the screen. It was a forwarded email, from Lydia's Gmail to her cousin Miranda. Subject: Thanksgiving weekend, RSVP. Confirmed. My eyes narrowed. The message was short. Bullet points. Confirmed guests, 35. Menu, traditional, all homemade. Venue, Marjorie's house, she insisted. House will be ours soon anyway, LOL. Should look like it already belongs to us. She's easy to manage, just make her feel useful. We'll say we're grateful. She eats that stuff up. My hand tightened around the phone. Something in my chest snapped, not like glass, but like bone. Something foundational. Then came the next email. Same thread, new message. Lydia again, sent just yesterday. Tio Raphael, please be generous this year. Grant is trying to get his business off the ground, and the house is practically ours. She already said she's leaving it to us. A gift from the older generation, you know how it is. There was no signature, just entitlement. I put the phone down and sat at the kitchen table. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just about a meal, or hosting, or family. This was about ownership, power, stripping me down until I was nothing but a free cook, with a name on a deed they couldn't wait to erase. I opened my laptop. My hands were shaking, but my mind was still. I opened a folder labeled Personal. Inside was a PDF my lawyer had sent a year ago, the original copy of my will. And right there in black and white, clear as the sun, it listed Grant as the sole inheritor of my home. A decision I had made when he married Lydia, when I still believed in them. Before I realized I was a transaction, not a mother. I stared at that document for a long time. Then I opened a new browser tab, searched the local pawn shops. The second listing had a photo. It was blurry, taken under a glass counter, but I'd recognize that watch anywhere. Gold face, black band, initials etched on the back. JMK James Marlon Keaton. It was listed for $450, not even a fraction of its worth, not even close. And yet they had sold it, pawned the only piece of history they never earned. I pressed the back of my hand to my mouth and sat still, not to cry, but to keep from screaming. Another notification, this time a text from Grant. Hey, just confirming you've got everything covered. Let me know if you need grocery money, but if not, cool. Let me know. As if I was a caterer he forgot to pay. As if I was a line item on a bill. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a new email to my lawyer. Subject line, immediate amendment request. And then another one to my travel agent. I was done playing the part they assigned. They had stolen from me, lied to me, used my dead husband's name to sell a fake version of themselves. And now they were preparing to fill my house with strangers, pretend it belonged to them, while I cooked in silence in the back like a maid too old to speak. I closed the laptop, walked back to the hallway, looked at the empty shelf again. It was still blank, still waiting, but not for long. I had plans now, and this time, I wasn't going to be their wallflower. I was going to be the storm. By sunrise the next day, I had already rewritten the ending. Not the ending of a holiday, not even the ending of a family. I was rewriting the ending of how I had been seen for far too long. It took less than 12 hours from the moment I saw my husband's watch in that pawn shop, listing to the moment I knew exactly what needed to be done. And once I knew, I didn't hesitate. I didn't mourn. I moved. I started with the lawyer. The amendment to my will was the first thing. The original version had been written shortly after Grant got married, in that short window of time when I still believed Lydia was a good person. I had trusted them to be the next stewards of this home. Trusted that family meant something. Trusted that the values James and I raised Grant with would carry over. That was before I became the woman who cooked but didn't eat with them, who bought gifts but wasn't listed on the card, who paid the mortgage until it was gone but had to knock before entering her own kitchen. The amendment removed Grant from the will entirely. The new version transferred the house into a private trust in my name, with instructions that after I passed, it would become a transitional home for female veterans with no family. Women like me. Women who gave everything and ended up forgotten. The second step was the bank. I closed my local account, moved all my savings to a credit union 2 counties over. No online access, no linked cards, no shared information. I had seen too many stories about seniors losing everything because someone guessed a password or made a phone call pretending to be helpful. I was done giving anyone access. Then came the locks. The front, side, and garage doors all had their codes changed. I had the locksmith install an interior bolt system on the master bedroom, just in case. Grant had a key. Lydia had one too. But they didn't have codes. And starting today, they never would again. I put all of this in motion in a matter of hours. I wasn't frantic. I was focused. There's a difference. One comes from fear, the other from clarity. And then I started packing. Not because I was leaving for good. No, this was still my home. But I needed to vanish just long enough for them to feel the weight of my absence. Long enough for the lie to collapse under its own weight. I called the resort in Key Largo, booked the suite I always dreamed of staying in but never let myself afford. 2 weeks, ocean view, spa access, breakfast delivered every morning, paid in full, under my maiden name. I moved to the kitchen and wrote the note. Simple. I've gone to Florida for the holiday. The house is all yours. Good luck. Marjorie. I folded the paper, slid it under a smooth river stone, and placed it on the kitchen island. It looked casual, but it was final. Then I opened the pantry, took out every can, every box, every bag of rice, every container of seasoning, packed it all into storage bins. Then I unplugged the second fridge in the garage and emptied it. I didn't throw anything away. I just moved it. into the locked storage unit in the back shed, the one they didn't know about, the one James had built with a triple bolt system and no digital entry. After that, I went into the dining room and took down every piece of crystal, every fork, every plate, every serving dish I had inherited from my mother. It all went into plastic tubs, stacked, labeled, locked away. They weren't going to serve 35 people with my things while pretending I didn't exist. I didn't cry, not even once. I did pause when I reached the photo of James in his uniform. It had sat in the same frame on the mantel for 23 years. I touched the glass. Not in sadness, in solidarity. They didn't just pawn your watch. They pawned your legacy, but I will not let them sell your name. At noon, I sent one final email. It went to Lydia's uncle Raphael, her cousin Camilla, and a few of the others who had RSVP'd to the Thanksgiving dinner. The message was polite, respectful, but I included 3 attachments: a photo of the pawn shop listing with the service watch, a copy of Lydia's email suggesting the house was already hers, and the amendment to the will, signed and notarized that morning. I ended the email with one sentence. I thought you might appreciate some clarity before your visit. Then I shut the laptop, walked through the house one last time. Every surface clean, every bed made, every light off. I opened the hallway closet, removed the last set of spare sheets, and folded them into a plastic bin. Inside the closet, on the upper shelf, I found a crumpled grocery list Lydia had left behind during her last visit. It had notes like sweet potatoes, sparkling cider, and pumpkin pie. At the bottom, she had written, casually in blue ink, "Decor. Let Marjorie feel involved. Let." As if kindness was a performance, as if involving me was a favor. I tore the list in half, then again, then dropped the pieces in the trash. By the time the taxi pulled into the driveway at 3:15, I was packed. 3 suitcases, 1 tote bag. Nothing heavy, just what I needed to watch the show from a safe distance. The driver loaded the bags into the trunk, then opened the door for me. I took one last look at the house. My house, my story, no longer theirs to write. And without another thought, I got in and shut the door. By the time I stepped into the suite at the resort in Key Largo, the sky outside had already dipped into that soft, golden haze that only lasts a few minutes before the dark swallows it whole. I dropped my bags inside the door, walked straight to the balcony, and stood still. Not because the ocean was beautiful, though it was. Not because I needed to catch my breath. I was standing still because I knew once I sat down, the second phase would begin, and from that moment on, there would be no turning back. I had already cleared the pantry, locked the dining ware, and secured the house. I had taken back control of my own walls. But this wasn't just about vanishing. It was about exposure. Theirs, not mine. I opened my phone and pulled up the message thread with Raphael, Lydia's uncle. He was the only one in that family who carried any kind of authority. He was also the only one whose name held weight with Lydia. She always dropped it when she wanted to impress someone. I remembered the way she spoke about him during that first Thanksgiving they'd spent in my house. The way she changed her voice when she said his name. Lower, sharper. Like she was auditioning for something. I knew he would be the key. I drafted the message carefully. No accusations, no venom, just concern. "Hi, Raphael. I hope your travel plans are still going well. I wanted to reach out ahead of Thursday. There are a few things I think you should be aware of. Not urgent, but important." Then I attached the 3 files. A scanned image of the watch listing from the pawn shop, the email where Lydia referred to the house as hers, and the will amendment. Each one labelled clearly, nothing dramatic, just facts. Before I hit send, I paused, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to feel the weight of what I was doing. This wasn't just strategy, it was justice. Slow, quiet justice that didn't need yelling or threats to land like a hammer. I pressed send. Next, I opened the guest list. Lydia had shared it with me in a burst of faux hospitality 2 weeks earlier. 35 names, half of them I had never met. A few I remembered from birthdays and baby showers. I didn't need to reach them all, just the ones that mattered. I wrote 2 more emails, one to Camilla, Lydia's cousin, a financial analyst who had asked me once if Lydia was really as put together as she seemed. The other to Mrs. Evelyn Cruz, the matriarch of their side, who still sent me a Christmas card every year. Both messages were the same in tone, calm, structured, but laced with enough detail to raise real questions. To Camilla, I included the financial inconsistencies I had found in Lydia's paper trail, the discrepancies between her claimed income and what I knew to be true, the mention of her boutique job, which she had told people was a full-time manager position, but was, in fact, part-time clerk work 3 days a week. To Mrs. Cruz, I attached a screenshot of the catering request Lydia had originally made under my name to a local vendor, only to cancel it and then claim she would handle everything herself. That email came with a timestamp that overlapped with the call she made to me asking for help with Thanksgiving. She never intended to cook. She intended to perform. After I sent those messages, I turned off the lights and sat down on the bed. The wheels were already turning. Raphael responded first. Short, polite. Thank you, Marjorie. This is surprising. I would like to speak with you further before we arrive. Camilla was more direct. So this is why she's been avoiding my questions. Good to know. I'll bring documents of my own. Evelyn didn't reply, but I saw the read receipt light up within 5 minutes. I smiled. The trap wasn't a violent one. It didn't need to be. All it required was silence, space, and truth. Truth delivered quietly, precisely, and at the perfect moment. And that moment would be 48 hours from now, when they all walked into a house with no food, no decorations, and no Marjorie. Only an echo of entitlement. I leaned back on the pillows and exhaled. The next morning, I woke early and drove back into town. Not to the house, not yet. I made a stop at the local office supply store, bought envelopes, a new ink cartridge, and a ream of heavy cream paper. Printed a hard copy of every document. Then I rented a small mailbox at a shipping center under my maiden name, just in case someone tried to intercept my mail. I wasn't paranoid. I was experienced. On the way back to the resort, I made one more call. To the pawn shop. I spoke to the manager, explained who I was, what the watch meant. He remembered the item. He said it had been brought in by a woman matching Lydia's description, said she seemed rushed, nervous. He still had the watch. I asked him to hold it. He said it would cost $450. I said I would be there tomorrow. By sunset, I was back on the balcony, watching the water roll in soft and even, as if none of this was happening. As if I were just another retiree enjoying her freedom. But I wasn't free yet. I was sharpening the blade. They wanted a holiday to showcase their image, a perfect Thanksgiving full of warmth and staged generosity. But what they were going to get was exposure, a room full of people asking the kind of questions that shattered illusions. Guests whispering in corners. Raphael pacing with a folder of receipts. Camilla making copies in the kitchen. And Lydia fumbling for explanations she hadn't rehearsed. I didn't need to be there to watch it fall apart. I had already lit the match. Now I just had to wait for the smoke. Thanksgiving morning arrived like a calm before the storm. I woke up in the resort to the sound of waves against the rocks and the faint knock of room service bringing breakfast. I didn't answer the door. I just sat there, still in bed, eyes open, letting the silence wrap around me like a shield. Somewhere across the quays, in the house I had spent 37 years building, Lydia was waking up to a disaster. It would have started quietly. She would have walked into the kitchen expecting the smell of roasted turkey, or at the very least, the beginnings of it. She would have looked around for casseroles in the oven, pies on the counter, the slow cooker humming in the background. But the kitchen would have been cold, the stovetop untouched, the countertops empty, not even salt or pepper left out. Then she would have opened the fridge and realized there was nothing there. Not a carton of eggs, not a stick of butter, no prepared dishes, no rolls, no desserts, no garnishes, not even milk for coffee. Next would have been the pantry. She would have flung open the doors, expecting shelves full of staples, flour, sugar, boxes of stuffing, bags of marshmallows for the sweet potatoes. Nothing. Only clean, bare shelves. Then the cabinets, for plates, silverware, glassware. But I had taken all of it. Every fork, every spoon, every dinner plate, all locked in the storage unit out back, behind a door she didn't even know existed. She would have walked faster now, checking the garage fridge, the linen closet, the storage bench by the window. I knew the order of her panic because I knew her. I knew how she thought, knew how she depended on everything being quietly done for her. But this year, there was no quiet help. There was no one behind the curtain pulling the levers. It was all hers now, and she was about to choke on it. At precisely 9:07 a.m., my phone buzzed. I let it ring twice, then picked it up. It was a text from Grant. It said simply, "Where are you? The kitchen is empty. There's nothing here." 3 minutes later, another message. "Did you forget it was today?" Then one more. "Mum, this isn't funny. Lydia's freaking out. People are on their way." I didn't reply. I leaned back in the chair and sipped my tea. By 9:42 a.m., the messages had shifted tone. Now they were coming from Lydia. Her first one was cold. "I don't understand what game you're playing." Then came the second. "There are guests arriving at noon. This is humiliating." The third message was longer, full of excuses, begging. "We didn't know you'd leave. We thought you understood. You always take care of this. Please just tell me where the food is. Or the dishes. I will make it work. I promise. I will make it right." I still said nothing. By 10:15 a.m., I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It went to voicemail. The message was from Camilla. "Hi, Marjorie. I just got here. Something feels very off. Lydia said you left for the holiday, but the house is completely unprepared. There's no food, no place settings. The decorations she bragged about aren't even up. I'm just checking to see if everything's okay." I played that message 3 times. Not because I needed to hear it again, but because I needed to mark the exact moment the tide began to turn. Lydia's lies were crumbling. The truth had entered the room, and it wasn't even noon yet. At 10:47 a.m., another text from Grant. "Mum, where are the plates? Where is the tablecloth? Where is the silverware? Please just tell me. People are arriving." Then silence. At 11:18 a.m., Raphael texted, "Marjorie, just arrived. Something is wrong. No meal, no setup. Can I call you?" I waited 3 minutes, then I called him back. He picked up on the first ring. His voice was calm but tense. "Marjorie." "What happened?" Lydia said there was a misunderstanding, but from what I'm seeing, this was not a misunderstanding. This looks like someone bailed. I took a breath. I didn't bail, Raphael. I planned a vacation. My kitchen is not a production line. My house is not a stage. And I am not a maid. He paused. I see. You received the email I sent. The documents. I did. Then you understand that this house is no longer part of Lydia's fantasy. She does not own it. She will not inherit it. And she certainly cannot sell it to fund anyone's business. Understood. One more thing. If Lydia told you I'd be hosting Thanksgiving, she lied. I never agreed to that. She assumed. Again. Thank you for the clarification, Marjorie. I hung up. I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. But I felt close. At 11:55 a.m., my phone lit up again. Photos. Sent by Camilla. One of the front porch, bare and uninviting. Another of the dining room, table still pushed against the wall. And a third of Lydia, standing in the center of the kitchen, arms out, face pale, surrounded by nothing but silence and judgment. I saved the photos. They weren't souvenirs. They were proof. Proof that the invisible woman had finally walked away and taken everything with her. The guests would be hungry. The stories would begin. And Lydia, for the first time in years, would have to explain something she couldn't spin. There was no food. There was no host. There was no illusion left to maintain. Only the truth. And that truth was now the centerpiece on her empty Thanksgiving table. I waited until the clock hit noon, not a minute before. The resort balcony stretched wide before me, sun hitting the water just right. I had coffee in hand and my phone on silent, face down. Let them sweat. Let them drown in explanations and failed excuses. That was the whole point. At 12:01, I turned the phone over. 16 missed calls, 10 from Grant, 4 from Lydia, 2 from Raphael. I didn't call back. I FaceTimed. Raphael answered on the second ring. His face appeared, tense and serious. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of my living room. Not theirs. Mine. The table was still bare. Guests stood scattered, some whispering in the corners, others eyeing their phones, waiting for direction. Lydia was nowhere in sight. Marjorie, Raphael said. Thank you for calling. I kept my voice flat. Not cold, just neutral. How are things? He looked away, then back. Things are unclear. Lydia has said very little. People are confused. There's no food, no setup. The house looks untouched. Because it is. There's nothing prepared. That's correct. You're not here. Correct again. A pause stretched between us. Then Camilla's voice called from somewhere off screen. Let me talk to her. Her face popped into the frame. Sharp, focused, annoyed. Marjorie, did you leave intentionally? Or did something happen? I leaned back in the chair. I left intentionally. Did you know this entire event was planned under the assumption you'd handle every detail? I did. That was the assumption, not the agreement. Camilla's eyes narrowed. She looked at Raphael. She never agreed. Raphael nodded slowly. We've been lied to. Camilla stepped out of the frame. I saw guests turning their heads now, trying to catch pieces of the conversation. Whispers spread. The buzz of discomfort grew thicker. And then Lydia appeared. She entered from the left, her expression drawn tight, voice falsely sweet. Marjorie, thank God. Can we talk? Please. I didn't respond. I watched her walk toward the camera, like she was still playing hostess in a room where the curtain had already dropped. She lowered her voice, though I knew half the house was still listening. This is a misunderstanding. We thought you were on board. I didn't realize the pressure this would put on you. I should have done more. I should have. I cut her off. You lied. Her mouth snapped shut. You lied to your family, to mine. You made promises using my house, my kitchen, my name. You used my husband's legacy to impress a group of people who now see right through you. And worst of all, you never asked. You assumed. Because that's all I've ever been to you. An assumption. Lydia opened her mouth again. Nothing came out. Raphael cleared his throat behind her. I received the documents, Marjorie. I nodded once. Then you understand. This house is not theirs. It never was. And after what I've learned, it never will be. He gave a slight bow of his head. Camilla returned into frame, holding her tablet. I've reviewed the emails, the catering request that was cancelled, the false statements, the financial inconsistencies. Lydia, you told me last week you had everything under control. Lydia turned. I did. Camilla cut her off. You lied to us. You lied about your income, about your job, about the arrangements. This entire event was staged for show, and now you've failed the performance. Another cousin appeared behind her, then another. Whispers turned to quiet conversation. A few people picked up jackets. One woman looked toward the front door, already stepping away. I watched it happen like a slow unraveling. The control Lydia thought she had, slipping through her fingers, thread by thread. Grant appeared behind her. He looked exhausted, ashen, his shirt half-tucked, his collar wrinkled. Mum, he said. I raised an eyebrow. You disappeared. I planned a vacation. You didn't say anything. I didn't owe you anything. He stepped closer to the camera. You could have told me. I did. In every silence, in every time you stood by while she assigned me chores like a servant, every time I cleaned your mess, cooked your dinners, and was left out of the photos. I told you every time you looked away. He blinked. I'm sorry. Not yet. Lydia stepped in again. Marjorie, please. This can still be fixed. We can order food. Make something happen, Camilla said sharply from the side. You can't fix deception with delivery apps. The words hung heavy in the air. A knock came from off-screen. Evelyn walked in. She didn't speak to Lydia. She walked straight to Raphael, whispered something. He nodded. Then he looked directly at me. We'll be leaving, Marjorie. Thank you for your clarity. He didn't look at Lydia, didn't hug her, didn't offer comfort, just turned. Guests followed, one by one, silent, cold, some glancing back, some not. Camilla stayed behind. She looked at Lydia, then at Grant. You need to repay what you borrowed. Then she walked out too. By the time the call ended, the only people left in the living room were Lydia, Grant, and a house full of missing pieces. I ended the call, turned the phone face down, took a sip of coffee, and smiled. Not wide, not loud, just enough. The reckoning had begun, and it was nowhere near finished. The house was no longer just quiet. It was stripped bare of control, of order, of illusion. After the call ended, Lydia stood frozen in the center of the kitchen. Her eyes were wide, mouth slightly open, as if waiting for a cue that never came. The room had emptied in waves, each relative taking with them a layer of credibility she could no longer claim. Her voice had grown hoarse from false apologies. The shine in her eyes was no longer charm. It was panic. Raphael's absence was felt like a dropped curtain. Camilla's final words about repayment had sunk like stone into the air. No one argued, no one begged. They simply left. By 3 o'clock p.m., the only people still in the house were Lydia, Grant, and three of her closest cousins, who hovered near the entryway, whispering among themselves. No one dared touch the untouched table. The chairs remained stacked in the dining corner, the tablecloth still in its plastic wrap. A turkey never thawed, casserole dishes never filled. The centerpiece was not a floral arrangement or a decorative candle. It was disgrace. Grant finally sat down on the edge of the sofa, elbows on his knees, palms covering his face. Lydia paced in slow, aimless circles. Her hands opened and closed like she didn't know where to place them. Then the doorbell rang. They both jumped. Lydia moved first, straightening her blouse, brushing her hair back. She whispered something about maybe Raphael coming back to talk. Maybe Evelyn had reconsidered. She opened the door with a forced smile. It wasn't family. It was the man from the pawn shop. He held a plastic grocery bag and an envelope. Lydia stared at him without speaking. Grant stepped forward. "You must be Marjorie's son." The man said it matter-of-factly, looking Grant up and down. Grant nodded slowly. "I came to return something. Your mother called yesterday. Paid in full. Said someone had brought this in. I checked the footage. It was your wife." He handed the bag to Grant. Inside was the velvet box. Grant opened it. The service watch rested inside, still intact, untouched. The man held out the envelope. Also from her. Receipt and a printed statement. "Says you'll understand." He tipped his head and walked away. Grant opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, a scanned copy of the original pawn slip, Lydia's signature, her ID on file, and under it, a note written in my handwriting. "You sold history for pocket change. I paid to bring it home." Grant stared at the paper for a long time. Lydia stood still, watching him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even blink. He just said her name once, and she stepped back like he'd shouted. "When did you do it?" Her mouth opened. "I just needed cash. It was temporary. I meant to buy it back. I didn't think—" "You didn't think. That's the problem. You never do." She reached out. "Grant, please." It was just one thing. "No. It was never just one thing. You sold something that wasn't yours. You lied to me. You lied to my family. You lied to hers. You built a Thanksgiving around theft and expectation. You made my mother disappear." Lydia's face crumbled. For the first time, there was no mask. She tried to step toward him. He backed away. "You don't come back from this." She turned toward the kitchen. "I'll fix it. I'll cook something. We can still make something nice. I just need you to—" Grant's voice cracked for the first time. "We don't have anything. There is no food, no decorations, no forgiveness." She paused, arms shaking. "You're overreacting." "No, I'm waking up." The room fell silent. One of her cousins picked up her purse from the entry table. "We're gonna go. This feels private now." They slipped out quietly. The door clicked shut behind them. Lydia turned back to Grant. Her voice fell into pleading. "Don't let her do this. Don't let her ruin us." He looked at the watch in his hand. "We ruined ourselves." And then he sat back down on the sofa. He didn't speak again. She didn't either. The house, once prepared to host a grand performance, sat hollow, echoing with conversations never had and respect never given. Lydia stood alone in a space she had tried to take over, now surrounded by the consequences of her own design. She walked to the front window, looking out toward the driveway. No cars remained, no laughter, no cameras flashing for social media, only a pale sun dipping low in the sky. By 6:30 p.m., the silence had settled like dust, and in Key Largo, I was finishing my dinner, alone, in peace. The final photo Camilla had sent me earlier that day had said it all. Lydia, standing over a table with a frozen turkey in her hand, wearing pearls, her heels sinking into the kitchen rug. Everything about her looked curated. Everything behind her looked broken. And there, just over her shoulder, you could see the small shelf where James's watch used to be. It was empty, but not forgotten. Not anymore. The next morning began with stillness. Not peace. Just stillness. That kind of quiet that presses on your eardrums and demands your attention. In the house I had built with my husband, the echoes of the night before had settled into the walls like ash. Lydia hadn't slept. She had spent most of the night seated at the kitchen island, elbows dug into the counter, scrolling through messages she could no longer answer. The family group chat had stopped pinging around 10. Before that, the tone had shifted from questions to quiet exits. Raphael had removed her from the thread. Camila never replied to her apology. Evelyn left a final message. Take time to reflect. We're done cleaning up your messes. Grant didn't speak to her. He had gone upstairs without a word. But before he went, he left something behind. The velvet box sat on the mantel, closed, centered, facing her. By mid-morning, Lydia walked the halls like a stranger in someone else's house. She didn't touch anything, didn't turn on the lights. She carried her phone like a lifeline that kept betraying her. The kitchen was spotless, not because she had cleaned, but because it had never been used. Then the envelope arrived. It was slid under the front door just after 10. No knock, no greeting. Just a single cream-colored envelope with her name handwritten in black ink. The handwriting was familiar, sharp, controlled. Lydia picked it up slowly. She turned it over, twice, as if expecting a threat inside. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a letter. Not from me. From James. My husband. My late husband. The date on the top was 11 years earlier. It had been written the week after his final surgery, when he knew he didn't have long. I remembered the morning he wrote it. Sitting at the kitchen table with the sunrise behind him, hand steady, voice quiet. He told me he didn't want to be remembered for medals or honors. He wanted to be remembered for the way he had protected what was his, for the way he made sure I was never left alone in a world that changed too fast. I had kept the letter sealed, until now. The letter read, To the person holding this, if you are reading this in my house, sitting at my table, wearing your place in this family like a crown, let me make something clear. You do not own anything here. You did not build this. You did not earn the weight of the walls or the quiet strength of the woman who made it all run. If you married into this family, you married into a legacy. That legacy has limits. You do not inherit trust. You prove yourself worthy of it. Do not mistake silence for weakness. Do not mistake kindness for surrender. And if you ever touch what belongs to me or my wife without permission, understand this. You will be watched, you will be known, and you will not be forgiven. This home was built by hands that bled for it. If you dare strip it for parts, know that you're not just breaking trust. You're breaking something sacred. And sacred things do not break quietly. James M. Pete. Lydia read the letter 3 times. By the 3rd time, her hands were shaking so badly she dropped it. She sat down hard on the edge of the stairwell, clutching the banister like the ground had shifted beneath her. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Her breath came in short bursts. Upstairs, Grant stood in the doorway, arms crossed. He had watched her read it. He had known what it would do. And then he walked away. She didn't follow. At noon, Camilla returned. She didn't knock. She didn't wait. She walked in with her laptop, sat down at the kitchen table, and pulled up spreadsheets. Lydia blinked at her. Camilla didn't look up. Here's the list of loans. Family, friends, former colleagues. You used Marjorie's name as implied collateral. That makes this personal. This is the total amount you owe. Lydia opened her mouth. Camilla cut her off. This is not a discussion. It's documentation. You will sign acknowledgement of debt, or the family will pursue formal charges, financial misrepresentation, elder exploitation, identity fraud. Lydia stood. Camilla didn't flinch. You took from a woman who did nothing but give. You insulted her, manipulated her, lied about her, and then you used her history as a sales pitch. We have no sympathy for you. We have receipts. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were the emails, the forged catering requests, the guest list Lydia had submitted to Raphael, with a footnote stating Marjorie was thrilled to be hosting and insisted on handling everything herself. Lydia's signature was at the bottom. Grant walked in as Camilla closed the laptop. He didn't say anything, but he sat next to Camilla. That said enough. Lydia finally sat down, across from them. Camilla pulled out a pen. Sign acknowledgement of debt. Initial every page. This is not forgiveness. This is accountability. Lydia picked up the pen with shaking hands. She signed. Page after page. When it was done, Camilla collected the documents, slid them into her bag, and stood. This family does not tolerate betrayal. Don't contact me again unless it's to make a payment. She walked out the door. Lydia didn't move for a long time. The house, now truly empty of both guests and excuses, seemed colder than it had ever been. She looked at the letter again, still lying on the floor where she dropped it. James's words sat heavy in the silence. Not dramatic, just final. Sacred things do not break quietly. And Lydia was finally starting to hear the sound of it breaking. All around her. All at once. By the time Thursday arrived, the storm had settled, but the air still buzzed with tension. The fallout from the wedding debacle had scorched every bridge Lydia once stood on. But in her mind, there was still one sliver of hope. Grant. She hadn't spoken to him since the signing of the debt acknowledgement. She had tried. Left notes by his bedroom door. Attempted polite conversation over cold coffee. Nothing. But this day felt different. It was the anniversary of James's passing. The house always held its breath on that day, and Lydia, dressed in a muted navy blouse and pressed slacks, seemed to believe it was the perfect excuse to press reset. She set the table with the good china, the set that had only ever come out during holidays or military ceremonies. She even brought out the silverware that still bore James's initials. She lit 2 tall candles and laid down a folded cloth napkin for each place. There were 3 seats, one for Grant, one for Raphael, and one for herself. But not for me. She didn't dare set a place for me. Raphael arrived first. He stood at the entrance, hands in his pockets, looking around like he had walked into a museum curated by someone else. Lydia greeted him with a hopeful smile. She reached for his jacket. He didn't let her take it. Thanks for dinner. I'm not staying long. She nodded, her fingers retreating to her sides. Grant arrived 10 minutes later. He didn't say a word, just walked in, looked at the candles, then sat down with a stiff posture. Dinner began in silence. Lydia served baked salmon, roasted vegetables, and garlic mashed potatoes. The exact menu James used to request on special days. She poured them wine. Neither drank. She cleared her throat, then began a slow, carefully practiced speech about how mistakes don't define people, about family, about redemption. Neither man looked up. Halfway through her monologue, Grant finally raised his eyes. He didn't blink. And when he spoke, it was cold steel, wrapped in velvet. I was wondering how long you'd keep pretending this is about healing. Lydia froze mid-sentence. Grant reached into his blazer and pulled out an envelope. He laid it down on the table. Inside were copies of property transfer papers Lydia had filed 4 years ago. One by one, she had shifted partial ownership of various family assets into a private account under her name, masked through a fabricated foundation. Grant slid another paper forward. It was the foundation's bylaws. All funds, once released from the trust, could be liquidated for personal gain if the listed co-founder claimed active status. That co-founder was Lydia. Raphael pushed his plate aside. So while Mum was recovering from surgery, you were funneling assets. Lydia's hands trembled. Grant didn't stop. You didn't just try to rewrite the inheritance. You tried to erase her name off the land she bled for. Lydia looked at him, eyes wide. I was trying to protect what's ours. Your mother would have destroyed everything out of pride. Grant leaned in. No, she was going to hand it to us. Until you spit on her name. He tapped the envelope. This is what I'll be filing in court tomorrow. We've already spoken to the Attorney General's office. The charges include elder exploitation, fraud, perjury, and breach of fiduciary duty. Lydia paled. Raphael stood up. There's more. He walked to the counter and pulled out a flash drive. This has recordings of your phone calls. The one where you laughed about telling Mom to cater the wedding alone. The one where you said, and I quote, "Let her run around with a clipboard. She thinks it means she matters." Lydia collapsed into her chair. The world around her began to close in, but it didn't stop there. Grant pulled out a second envelope. And this is the document Marjorie signed last week. He opened it. It was a full relinquishment of her entire estate, not to us, not to him, but to a non-profit foundation in her name. The Keaton Trust for Women's Independence. The foundation would receive every asset under her name, effective immediately. Her house, her pension, her stock portfolio. Everything. Raphael read from the printout. It will provide shelter, legal aid, and job training to women over 60 who have been financially exploited by their families. Grant folded his arms. Your actions inspired its mission. Congratulations. Lydia sat motionless. No tears, just shock. You can't undo this with a few place settings and some salmon. Raphael walked to the door. We're done with quiet. You wanted a fight. You got one. Grant didn't move. You stole our trust. She gave it back to people who deserve it more. And with that, he stood. They left together, the front door closed with finality. Lydia remained seated at the candle-lit table. The china plates now felt like artifacts from a life she never actually earned. The candles flickered in front of her, but they didn't warm the space. She reached for her wineglass. Her hand stopped halfway. On the mantel was the photo of James, still in uniform, still watching. His words echoed again. Sacred things do not break quietly. And tonight, they had broken all at once, in public, with witnesses, and with no way back. 2 weeks passed. Lydia hadn't left the house. The Christmas decorations still clung desperately to the walls and windows, but their sparkle had dulled. The wreath sagged. The tree in the corner dried out by the hour. needles falling like soft warning of something that once stood tall but had already given up. The house had gone quiet, not peaceful, hollow. The legal summons arrived early Monday morning. 2 thick envelopes dropped through the front mail slot. One was from the Office of Elder Justice, the other from the Keaton Foundation's attorneys. Lydia opened them with shaking hands. The first notified her that an official investigation into her financial dealings over the past 6 years was now underway. She was ordered to provide all documentation as related to property transfers, charitable withdrawals, and the foundation she had created under false pretenses. The second envelope stung deeper. It was a notice of civil litigation filed jointly by Grant and Raphael. They were suing for restitution of misappropriated family assets, including properties, accounts, and trust funds she had funneled into her control behind Marjorie's back. She dropped the envelopes on the floor and backed away. It was happening, in real time, and it wasn't going to stop. Grant was relentless. He and Raphael had already spoken with Marjorie's legal counsel, and together they were moving to freeze all residual accounts tied to Lydia's name pending court review. Marjorie had stayed silent. She hadn't reached out once. Lydia turned to her phone. She opened Grant's contact, typed out a dozen words, erased them, typed them again, then backspaced everything and tossed the phone onto the couch. She walked into the kitchen, reached for the wine. Her hand froze. Instead, she opened the drawer and pulled out the old journal. Marjorie's journal, the one she had once hidden but never bothered reading. It was time. She sat at the table and opened it. The handwriting was neat, steady, unrushed. December the 3rd. He left the keys on the counter, said he didn't need 2 houses anymore. I told him the house wasn't mine without him in it. Lydia's throat tightened. January 18th. Raphael called from school. He asked if he could come home for the weekend. He didn't say it, but I know. His roommate's mother was visiting, and he missed the feeling of someone hugging him just because he was awake. April 27th. I baked Grant's favorite bread. He didn't come home that night. Lydia said he had a study group, but I found the bread in the trash, still in the bag. Lydia kept flipping, page after page, quiet grief bleeding into silent resolve. June 9th. I heard them laugh, Raphael and Grant. Lydia had burned the casserole again, and they tried to fix it with hot sauce. I sat outside on the steps and listened. That sound was worth every lonely dinner I'd eaten before. July 4th, I stayed home. Lydia said the family was going out, but the photos online showed them all at the cabin. I wasn't invited. Again. November 25th, Thanksgiving. Lydia told me to prep the table and leave, said they wanted a younger energy this year. I went back to my room and cried quietly so the dog wouldn't get nervous. The journal dropped from Lydia's hands. It wasn't anger that shook her. It was shame. Cold. Icy. Shame so deep it burned. She had believed her version of the story for so long, she'd forgotten there had always been another one. One that didn't paint her as the victim, but the villain cloaked in hospitality and silk scarves. Her phone buzzed, a news notification. She tapped it open. Breaking. Keaton Trust for Women's Independence officially launched today in partnership with 3 national nonprofits. The foundation will open its first shelter in Charleston by spring. Lydia kept reading. Marjorie Keaton, former Air Force logistics analyst and widow of decorated veteran James Keaton, created the trust after a personal experience of financial manipulation by her own family. The article continued. When asked about the decision to give up her multi-million-dollar estate to help vulnerable women, she simply said, "When you've survived betrayal in silence, you owe your voice to those who still live in fear." Lydia stared at the screen. There was a photo of Marjorie, standing in front of a podium. The lighting caught the edges of her silver hair. She wasn't smiling, but her face was calm, steady. Lydia threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall, cracked, fell. She screamed, not words, just sound, raw, guttural, the kind of sound that comes when the world no longer gives you even the illusion of control. The next day, she tried calling Raphael. Voicemail. She tried Grant. No answer. She left a message. Please, I just want to talk. Not about the foundation. Just, please. No one called back. By Friday, the subpoenas arrived. Depositions scheduled, document demands, forensic accountants assigned. She had to hire a lawyer. The one she used before wouldn't return her calls. She found a new one, twice the cost, half the sympathy. He listened, took notes, then gave her the same look everyone else had started giving her. Cold neutrality. He asked her one question. Why did you do it? She didn't answer. She didn't know anymore. At first, maybe it was about control, then fear, then pride. Eventually, it was habit. She had built her power on secrecy and smiles, and when that cracked, there was nothing underneath but rot. That Sunday, Lydia walked into her own bedroom, looked around, and realized something. None of it belonged to her anymore. Not the art on the wall. Marjorie picked that. Not the curtains. Raphael had helped sew those, not the bed. James had bought it for their anniversary. She was a ghost inside a museum built on someone else's grief. She packed a suitcase. She didn't know where she was going yet, but she knew no one would be waiting. Not this time. Lydia's absence from the Christmas dinner was the first time in 23 years her name wasn't scribbled onto a place card at the long oak table. This time, there was no folding chair squeezed between the sideboard and the fireplace for her. No complaints about the stuffing being too dry or the cranberry sauce being too tart. Marjorie sat at the head of the table. Raphael passed the rolls. Grant poured the wine. For once, there was laughter that didn't sound like performance. Conversation that didn't pause when one particular pair of heels clicked across the kitchen tile. It wasn't a celebration of Lydia's fall. It was a quiet acknowledgement of what her absence had made possible. Outside that house, though, things were anything but quiet. Lydia had left town the same day she packed. A black SUV picked her up and drove her 5 hours upstate to a temporary rental by a frozen lake. The isolation wasn't peace. It was exposure. Every creak of the old cabin floor reminded her she was no longer hiding behind chandeliers and title deeds. The court filings made headlines by the following Tuesday. Keaton widow wins back entire estate in groundbreaking settlement. Beneath it ran a photo of Marjorie flanked by 2 lawyers. Her eyes were tired but focused. Her hands clasped, knuckles white. The article laid it all bare. The years of covert manipulation, the fraudulent shell accounts, the abuse of power disguised as household management, the way Lydia siphoned properties, donations, even government reimbursements tied to James's veteran benefits. It detailed how Raphael had cross-referenced financial records with veteran aid grants and traced the siphoned funds to Lydia's private portfolios. And it included the final judgment. Everything reverted. Not just the ranch and the properties. Every asset registered under James's name or connected to his service benefits was now protected under the Keaton Trust and immune from further claims. Lydia's personal accounts had been frozen. Her legal team scrambled to secure a plea bargain in exchange for avoiding jail time. But the damage had been done. Raphael's university tuition was now permanently covered by the trust. Grant's name was removed from the frozen accounts, cleared of collusion after a tearful testimony detailing years of pressure and manipulation. Lydia had no allies left, not even in court. The final hearing was closed to the press. Just Marjorie, her lawyer, Lydia, and the judge. When Lydia walked in, she looked thinner, older. Her hair, once set into a perfect curl, hung limp over her shoulders. Her suit was still expensive, but the energy around her had shifted. There was no arrogance, no illusion of control. Marjorie didn't flinch when they locked eyes. She didn't offer a nod or a greeting, just sat, poised, waiting. The judge read the verdict aloud. 30 minutes. All points ruled in favor of the plaintiff. Lydia was barred from any future engagement with Marjorie's trust, Raphael's education funds, or James's veteran's pension. Restitution was ordered, but with Lydia's frozen accounts, it would be a symbolic amount. The real sentence was social and legal exile. As the room emptied, Marjorie remained seated. So did Lydia. A bailiff waited by the door, glancing at his watch. Lydia broke the silence. She said she had only wanted to feel like she belonged. She had spent years crafting the image of the perfect matriarch. The woman who knew where every spoon went, who had a list for every holiday, who made the decisions without ever raising her voice. But the truth was, she had always feared being invisible. Marjorie said nothing. Lydia continued. She spoke about her childhood, about being the daughter of a mother who never said "I love you," of watching her father leave and never come back, of spending her 20s earning attention through beauty and her 30s clinging to it through control. She said she was sorry. She said she didn't expect forgiveness. She said she wasn't even sure she deserved it. Marjorie looked at her for a long time, her face unreadable, her hands still. Then, in a quiet voice, she said that pain never justified cruelty. She said she had learned the hard way that silence could rot a soul faster than anger ever could. That surviving betrayal didn't mean you had to become the betrayer in turn. That dignity wasn't inherited. It was chosen. And that she hoped, in the solitude Lydia had created for herself, she might finally learn to sit with the truth instead of trying to rewrite it. Marjorie stood, picked up her coat, walked to the door. Lydia didn't follow. That night, Marjorie sat by the fireplace in her living room, sipping tea. The air was colder now, but it no longer bit. It reminded her of clarity, of starting over. The house was quieter than ever, but the silence no longer hurt. It held space. Space she had earned. She thought about everything that had been taken from her, and everything she had taken back without shouting, without revenge, without malice. Just facts, just calm, calculated truth. She had rebuilt her dignity in the same place it was once stripped from her. And now, with the estate safe, Raphael protected, and Grant slowly returning to who he once was, she felt something new settle in her chest. Stillness, not loneliness, stillness. She opened the window slightly. Let the wind in. No more closed doors, no more whispered betrayals. Only what she chose to carry forward. And in that choice, she had found something more powerful than control. She had found peace. It started with a letter, handwritten, no return address. Just a simple card with embossed edges. Inside, Raphael's neat handwriting said he had been accepted into a graduate program out of state, a full scholarship, a stipend, and a note that said, "None of this would have happened if you hadn't stood your ground." Marjorie read the line twice. Then she folded the card and set it on the windowsill. Outside, a fresh blanket of snow covered the front lawn. The old gate had finally been repaired. The garden, though bare in the winter frost, had been turned and prepped for spring. She stepped into the hallway. For years, that hallway echoed with tension, the clicking of Lydia's heels, the half-finished conversations, the doors that never quite closed right, as if the house itself had grown wary of its occupants. Now it was quiet, and the silence was warm. Grant came by once a week now, never unannounced, never too long. But he came. They didn't talk about the past, not directly. He'd mention a recipe she used to make when he was a child. She'd leave his favorite coffee out on the counter. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was something like reaching across a canyon and finding solid ground. One evening, he stood in the kitchen longer than usual. He picked at a chipped tile on the backsplash and asked if she still had the old photograph, the one of him and Raphael fishing with James near the creek. Marjorie nodded. She went upstairs and found it in the drawer next to her bed. The frame was dusty, the glass slightly cracked, but the photo was intact. Grant took it with both hands, said nothing, but his eyes softened. That was enough. On New Year's Eve, she made a pot of stew and brought it over to McClellan's place. They ate by the window, watching fireworks light up the distant sky. They didn't toast to revenge. They didn't even mention Lydia. Instead, they talked about the non-profit. By spring, the grant would be fully funded. A training program designed for widows, veterans' spouses, and women over 60 who had been pushed out of their homes, their finances, or their identities. Marjorie had signed the papers herself. She wasn't passing the torch, she was lighting the first one. It wasn't about revenge, it wasn't about erasing the years she lost. It was about making sure other women didn't have to stay silent, didn't have to live under the pressure of being polite while being erased. The ribbon cutting was quiet. No press, no flashbulbs. Just 5 women seated in folding chairs, listening to Marjorie tell her story in her own voice. They didn't clap at the end. One woman cried softly, another nodded. A third reached out and took her hand. That was the moment Marjorie knew she had done something real. One morning, months later, Marjorie stood in the garden again. The rose bushes were finally blooming. New trellises lined the fence. She ran a hand across the wooden arch Raphael had helped her install. It was smooth, newly varnished, and for the first time in years, she exhaled without a weight on her chest. She thought of James, not as a symbol, not as a man lost too soon, but as the person who once held her hand during thunderstorms, who sat with her at the kitchen table while the boys slept, who believed she was the center of their home, not just the one who paid bills and folded laundry. She whispered his name once. Then she walked back inside. She made tea. She sat in her chair. And for the first time in decades, she felt no need to explain herself to anyone. Not to a son who had once failed to stand beside her. Not to a daughter-in-law who had turned trust into currency. Not even to herself. The house had been rebuilt. The silence was hers now, not as a void, but as a canvas. And in that quiet space, Marjorie didn't feel lonely. She felt free. If you're still listening, thank you for walking this journey with me. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about reclaiming a voice long buried under politeness and obligation. About standing tall, not through revenge, but through rebuilding. Sometimes the best kind of justice isn't loud or violent. Sometimes it's the quiet return of peace to a place that had forgotten what peace felt like. And if this story reminded you of someone you know, or of something you've survived, I hope you remember this. Silence doesn't mean surrender, and healing doesn't always wait for permission.